true story that I heard and collected. Horror Story: The Curse of Blackwood House. The gray sky loomed over the remote countryside of Vermont, carrying a cold wind that blew through the sparse trees. Blackwood Manor, the massive house nestled in the valley, once stood as a symbol of power and wealth. But now it lay silent like a ruin, casting a shadow of gloom over the entire area. Inside the house, the painful memories still lingered in the air, and the story of the Blackwood family's tragedy continued to be whispered among the locals with eerie reverence. Richard Blackwood, the master of Blackwood Manor, had once been one of the most renowned businessmen of his era. He was the founder of the Blackwood Arms Company, whose weapons were used in many wars. With the wealth that came from arms trading, the Blackwood family lived a life of luxury. But everything fell apart when Richard's daughter passed away from an unknown illness, and not long after, Richard himself died suddenly in a mysterious carriage accident. The double loss of Richard and his daughter left a massive void in the heart of Martha Blackwood, Richard's wife and the child's mother. In her grief and despair, Martha felt as though her life had ended along with the loss of her family. However, this pain was not the only thing tormenting her. Inside the vast manor, Martha began to sense the presence of something invisible, cold, and threatening. She believed that her family was being haunted by the spirits of those who had fallen to the weapons Richard had sold. Martha became consumed by the haunting memories of the countless nameless deaths caused by Blackwood's guns. She heard whispers in the night and felt as if someone was walking through the hallways. Nightmares filled with images of soldiers falling on the battlefield haunted her every time she closed her eyes. She dreamt of them with their eyes wide open and bloodied bodies reaching out toward her, demanding retribution. Each day, Martha's fear grew stronger, and she knew these spirits would never leave her in peace. One day, Martha met a spiritual friend, Mrs. Eliza, a woman famous in the area for her ability to communicate with the afterlife. Mrs. Eliza had a mysterious appearance, with deep-set eyes and a voice that whispered like the wind. Martha told Eliza about the things she had experienced in the house, about the feeling of being watched and the terrifying dreams. Mrs. Eliza listened attentively, and after a moment of reflection, she gave a frightening warning. "Eliza, you have to believe me," Martha said, trembling. "I feel like they are coming for me. Those who fell under Richard's gun. I can't bear these dreams any longer." Eliza looked straight into Martha's eyes, her expression serious. "Those spirits are not mere illusions. They have been summoned by what your family has done. They are not coming for Richard. They are coming for you, and they will not stop until they take what they believe they are owed." Martha felt a chill down her spine, but Mrs. Eliza wasn't finished. She whispered, "However, there is a way to lead them astray. Your house. It can become your sanctuary if it never stops changing. The spirits are obsessed with stability, with what has ended, and if the house is always under construction, they will never be able to find you." Martha sat in silence, feeling as if the air in the room had frozen. Building the house, that was the only way to escape the curse. If the house continued to grow, with new rooms, endless hallways, and staircases leading to nowhere, the spirits would never be able to find their way into her sanctuary. The house must always be under construction. Never let it stop, Eliza instructed, her voice soft but filled with authority. If you do that, they will never find you. With fear ruling her mind, Martha immediately began the plan to rebuild Blackwood Manor. She hired dozens of workers, architects, and builders to start expanding the house. Martha ordered that the work should never stop, day or night. The workers began constructing staircases leading to nowhere, windows that opened to brick walls, and winding hallways with no exit. Each wall was erected, each new room was built, all in nonsensical and chaotic designs with no adherence to architectural rules. The workers were baffled by Martha's bizarre requests, but no one dared to speak up as she paid handsomely and no one wanted to lose their job. Blackwood Manor gradually transformed into a complex and confusing maze with new rooms and passageways appearing every day. Martha believed that by doing this, she could mislead the spirits, ensuring they would never find her. However, as the house grew larger, Martha still did not feel any safer. The dreams of vengeful spirits continued to haunt her every night, and the feeling of being watched never went away. Whispers in the dark, invisible footsteps, everything persisted, as if the spirits were drawing closer and closer, and the house might not be enough to protect her forever. Blackwood Manor, already vast, began transforming into an incomprehensible structure. Martha, obsessed with the curse and the spirits she believed were pursuing her, set out to turn the house into a nonsensical maze, a place she believed would protect her from supernatural forces. Martha hired a slew of workers, builders, and architects, demanding that the house be continuously expanded. They were all paid handsomely, but her requests grew increasingly bizarre and perplexing. She did not want a clear construction plan. She simply ordered them to build more rooms, hallways, and staircases without any clear purpose. Staircases leading to nowhere began to sprout all over the place. Every morning, the workers received instructions to build long staircases that led up to a blank wall. These staircases had no end, did not lead to any room, and simply stopped abruptly, suspended in the air. Some of the workers questioned the purpose behind these staircases, but Martha only told them that this was the only way for her to escape the spirits. Windows opening to brick walls were another of Martha's strange demands. Ordinary windows that should have looked out over the garden or into other rooms were instead built to open directly onto gray brick walls. No light, no air. Some workers whispered among themselves that this house was turning into a giant trap. They didn't understand why anyone would need such useless windows, but none dared ask further for fear of losing their jobs. Winding hallways with no exits also appeared throughout the house. Long, dark corridors led straight into dead ends. Some hallways took sudden sharp turns, only to vanish into empty spaces. Anyone who walked through these halls felt as though they were getting lost in the very strange space they were building. Every day, the workers followed Martha's instructions, constructing more sections of the house that they knew would never be used. But they did not speak up, as Martha paid them far more than a regular construction job. However, not everyone could ignore the rising sense of fear within them. Some workers began to feel uneasy. They heard strange noises in the house at night, footsteps that none of them had made, whispers coming from empty rooms. A few claimed to have seen figures passing by the windows, even though only Martha lived in the house. As the house expanded, the workers' fear grew. Some quit after witnessing inexplicable events. A young builder recounted that, while he was working, a door slammed shut right in front of him, with no one nearby. He swore he saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway, dressed in black, but when he ran closer, the figure vanished. These occurrences began to spread, but no one dared mention them in front of Martha. She always remained calm and resolute in continuing the construction. To Martha, the more complex and illogical the house became, the safer she felt. She believed that if the house turned into an inescapable maze, the spirits searching for her would get lost within it and never find her. As the house continued to expand, Martha began holding seance sessions in the newly constructed rooms. She believed she could communicate with the afterlife, with the spirits of Richard and her daughter. Martha hoped they would guide her on how to protect herself from the curse. Every night, in a specially arranged room with candles and a Ouija board, Martha sat alone in the darkness, asking about the future and seeking help from the departed spirits. During the seances, Martha began hearing whispers. She believed they were the voices of Richard and her daughter, who had been trapped by the afterlife. Martha repeatedly asked them how to continue building the house, and she claimed to have received instructions from them. Each directive grew more bizarre, but Martha had no doubts. She was willing to follow whatever the afterlife told her, convinced that this was the only way to protect herself. "The house isn't big enough," Martha whispered to herself during one seance. "They told me I must build more. More staircases, windows, sealed rooms. Only then will I be safe." The workers in the house began to notice a dramatic change in Martha's mindset. She became increasingly obsessed with expanding the house. No matter how absurd the construction was, she demanded more additions. She didn't care about the reasoning, only that the house kept growing. Martha believed that as long as the house continued to expand, she would be safe from the vengeful spirits pursuing her. Blackwood Manor was no longer an ordinary residence. It had become a haunting labyrinth where empty rooms connected through meaningless long corridors, staircases leading nowhere, and doors that opened into darkness. Yet Martha, consumed by fear and the whispers from the afterlife, did not stop. She believed this was the only way to escape the vengeance of the spirits she feared would come for her at any moment. Construction on Blackwood Manor continued, with the sound of hammers pounding and saws screeching from morning until night. The house was increasingly turning into an absurd maze, with staircases leading into empty space, windows that opened to nothing, and endless, disorienting hallways. However, while the workers continued their tasks, the atmosphere inside the house grew heavier and stranger. The first signs of the supernatural began to appear, spreading among the workers and causing many to feel uneasy. At first, these occurrences were minor, things that were easy to dismiss. Some workers reported hearing light footsteps echoing from the upper floors, even though no one was working there. During the day, the house was busy with the sounds of construction, but when night fell and the workers went home, the silence inside the house became more terrifying than ever. The creaking of wooden boards echoed, as if someone was moving through the darkness. A worker named Jacob, a middle-aged man who had been working there since the beginning of construction, recounted that one night while inspecting the top floor, he felt a cold breeze pass by, even though all the windows were shut. When Jacob turned around, he saw a figure at the end of the hallway, a woman dressed in black, walking slowly. But as Jacob approached to get a closer look, the figure vanished. "I'm certain I saw someone," Jacob told the other workers the next morning. "A woman. But when I got closer, she disappeared." At first, everyone laughed it off, thinking it was just Jacob's imagination. But then, more workers started sharing similar experiences. Invisible footsteps, fleeting figures passing by windows, and eerie laughter echoing from empty rooms became the main topics of conversation. Some swore they heard mocking laughter while they worked, but when they turned around, no one was there. The ghosts seemed to be wandering through the house, quietly yet making their presence unmistakable. Martha Blackwood, the only person still living in the house, also began to notice the strange occurrences. At first, she dismissed the workers' reports, thinking they were merely products of their imagination. But gradually, these phenomena became more apparent to her as well. One night, as Martha sat in the seance room, preparing to start her usual ritual, she felt as though someone was watching her. She lifted her head, looking around the empty room. The dim candlelight flickered against the wall in front of her, and for a moment, Martha swore she saw a figure in the flames, a woman in a black dress, standing still, staring directly at her. Martha blinked, and the figure vanished. But the fear inside her began to grow. She wondered whether it was the spirit of one of those who had fallen under Richard's gun, or if it was merely her imagination, haunted by the fears she had created herself. More and more, Martha felt as though she was being watched in her own home. She no longer felt at peace, not even in the rooms she once considered safe. Despite the house being vast and complex, with winding hallways and staircases, Martha felt as if the ghosts were waiting for her around every corner. One day, while working, Ethan, a young worker, was painting a new door on the third floor when he heard a soft, mocking, and chilling giggle. The laughter came from one of the completed rooms. Ethan shuddered but tried to calm himself, thinking it might be one of the other workers playing a prank. "Who's there?" Ethan called out as he walked toward the room. When he opened the door, the room was empty. No one was there. Ethan turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind him, startling him. His heart raced, and he immediately felt a cold breath right next to his ear. Ethan, panicked, ran from the third floor, not daring to look back. When he recounted the incident to the others, his face was pale. He couldn't explain what had happened, but the fear spread quickly among the workers. Despite this, Martha continued with the construction of the house. She deliberately ignored the workers' warnings, believing that the spirits were appearing only because she hadn't yet completed her task. Each night, Martha held more seances, trying to communicate with Richard and her daughter for further guidance. However, instead of receiving help, she began hearing more strange voices. The whispers never stopped, as if hundreds of voices were trying to speak to her at once. These voices were no longer gentle. They had become angry and full of hatred. "Martha, you cannot escape. The house will not protect you forever," the voices echoed, creeping through every corner of the house, making Martha feel trapped. The supernatural occurrences intensified, and gradually, even Martha could no longer ignore them. She could feel that the house she had built to protect herself was now turning against her. The ghosts within the house were no longer just invisible spirits. They had become part of the house itself, watching her every move, waiting for her to fall into the very trap she had created. Blackwood Manor, with all its oddities and absurdities, was no longer a safe haven for Martha. It had become her prison, where angry spirits lurked in the shadows, ready to approach her at any moment. The dark nights at Blackwood Manor were no longer a time for rest. Martha began having terrifying dreams every night. Sleep, once a place to find peace, had now become an endless nightmare, where she was surrounded by angry and vengeful spirits. Each time she closed her eyes, Martha found herself standing amidst a sea of souls, their empty yet hate-filled faces looming in the darkness. They moved toward her, arms reaching out, and each face was an accusation. Richard Blackwood, the murderer. Your family took our lives. The furious cries echoed in her mind, cutting deep into her soul like blades. Martha tried to flee, but her feet were rooted to the cold ground. These spirits weren't just angry with Richard. Their hatred was now directed at her as well. You won't escape. You will pay too. The vengeful faces overwhelmed her, each gaze burning into her as if they were pulling her down into the abyss of death. Every time she awoke, Martha was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding wildly. She could feel the fear consuming every cell in her body. During the day, the sounds of hammers and saws in the vast house helped her temporarily forget the nightmares. But when night fell, the darkness brought back the fury of the spirits, ones she could never escape. Martha gradually became paranoid, believing that the dreams were not mere figments of her imagination but reality. She was convinced that the souls of those who had fallen under the Blackwood gun were coming for her, seeking revenge. They were not just haunting her dreams, but also the real world. Their ghosts were lurking in every hallway, staircase, and sealed room of the house. Fear consumed Martha's mind. She began avoiding the workers in the house, only working and sleeping in areas she believed were safe. But the house, despite its vastness and bizarre, illogical design, no longer felt like a refuge for her. Martha felt watched at all times, from the dark rooms to the winding hallways. In her panic, Martha decided that the house had to continue expanding. Construction was the only way to keep the spirits from finding her. The cryptic messages from her seances further fueled her belief that she was doing the right thing. She constantly received messages during the seances, telling her that only when the house became an inescapable labyrinth would she be able to evade the ghosts pursuing her. Each day, the workers received new instructions from Martha. New staircases, winding corridors, and windowless rooms were constantly being built, without following any sort of logical plan. She no longer cared about the purpose of each new addition. She only believed that the more complicated the house became, the less likely the spirits would be able to find her. One evening, as Martha sat in the seance room, the candlelight dancing on the walls, she felt a cold hand touch her shoulder. She startled and turned around, but no one was there. However, in that brief moment, she swore she had seen a figure standing silently in the corner of the room, watching her with dark, soulless eyes. The figure didn't move, only stood there, staring at her, before fading into the shadows. She stood up, trying to regain her composure, but the dreams and these strange occurrences began to make her doubt her own sanity. She started to wonder if she was losing her mind or if all of this was truly punishment from the afterlife. The increasingly frequent appearances of the spirits made Martha feel imprisoned in her own home. The angry spirits, strange voices, and haunting dreams pushed her to the brink of collapse. Blackwood Manor, which Martha had built to protect herself from the afterlife, had now become a true nightmare. The house grew larger each day, but so did Martha's fear, swallowing her like an invisible shadow. Martha believed that her departure from this world was no longer a distant fate. She could feel the presence of death every time the ghosts appeared before her. And no matter how much the house expanded, the vengeful spirits always found her, threatening to drag her down with them into the endless darkness. Martha believed that her departure from this world was no longer a distant fate. She could feel the presence of death every time the ghosts appeared before her. And no matter how much the house expanded, the vengeful spirits always found her, threatening to drag her down with them into the endless darkness. Blackwood Manor had become a giant trap, not just for the spirits, but for Martha herself. She had built it to protect herself, but now the very house was becoming part of the curse, imprisoning and consuming her day by day. In the town of Vermont, the locals, especially the older residents, began to whisper about the curse of the Blackwood family. To them, Blackwood Manor was no longer just a luxurious mansion, but a cursed place, a nightmare built of brick and stone. They believed that not only Martha, but everyone connected to the house, from the workers to the servants, would be dragged into the afterlife by the curse. Stories of the mysterious deaths of Richard Blackwood and his daughter started to resurface, each retold with increasingly gruesome details as people added their own fabrications to enhance the house's eerie reputation. One winter morning, as thick fog enveloped the house, Henry Lancaster, an old friend of Richard Blackwood, came to visit. Henry was an elderly man with sharp eyes and a face deeply etched with the wrinkles of time. He had once been a business partner of Richard's and hadn't seen Martha since her husband's passing. However, after hearing the rumors surrounding the Blackwood family, he felt compelled to come and speak with Martha. As Henry stepped into the house, he couldn't help but sense the strange atmosphere surrounding the place. The dim light from the windows and the sound of the wind howling through the hallways made the house seem to shudder with each cold gust. Henry felt a chill run down his spine as he made his way to the sitting room, where Martha was sitting in front of the fireplace, staring into the flames. "Martha," Henry called, his voice deep and warm, but full of concern. Martha turned to face him, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and her expression weary. She gestured for Henry to sit down. No words were needed. Both knew that this meeting was not just an ordinary visit. "I've heard about what's happening here," Henry began. "Everyone in town. They're talking about the curse, about this house, and the spirits you're trying to escape. I'm here to warn you. You need to stop, Martha. If you don't, this house will consume you and everyone who steps inside." Martha looked at Henry with empty eyes. She had heard these warnings many times before, but no one understood the terror she was facing. "You need to leave this place, Martha," Henry continued, his voice growing more urgent. "This house, it can't protect you forever. If you keep going, it will become a trap for you. The spirits aren't just after you. They'll harm anyone who dares to be connected to the Blackwood family. I'm urging you, stop before it's too late." Martha remained silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on Henry, but in her mind, images of her terrifying dreams and the ghosts still flooded her thoughts. She recalled the angry faces in her dreams, the spirits screaming for her life and accusing the Blackwood family. Martha knew that the curse had become too powerful to escape easily. "No, Henry, you don't understand," Martha whispered, her voice filled with despair. "If I stop, if I leave, they will find me. The spirits, they won't stop until I'm gone. I have to keep building. It's the only way I can escape. If I stop, they'll harm me." Henry looked at Martha, worry etched across his face. Before him was no longer the calm, intelligent woman he once knew, but a woman consumed by fear and panic. Martha was drowning in her own terror, and nothing could change her mind. "Martha, this house can't protect you forever." Henry tried to reason with her. "It's only making things worse. The spirits you think are lost in the house, they're growing stronger, and one day, no wall or staircase will stop them. You need to leave before it's too late." But Martha just shook her head, her eyes flashing with a mixture of determination and panic. "If I stop, they'll come for me immediately. You don't understand, Henry. I can't stop. They will never let me go." Henry left with a heavy heart. He knew there was nothing that could change Martha's mind. She had been consumed by the curse and believed that only the continuous construction of the house could keep her safe. His warnings had no effect, and Henry felt powerless as he departed from Blackwood Manor, convinced that not only Martha but everyone connected to it would meet a terrible fate. The townspeople began talking about Henry's encounter with Martha. Rumors about the Blackwood family curse spread even further, and the stories about Blackwood Manor grew more frightening. They said that anyone who entered the house never returned the same. The house had become a black hole of death. After her meeting with Henry, Martha felt her fear growing stronger. The spirits seemed closer than ever. The more she built, the clearer their shapes became, and she could feel their cold presence lurking in every corner of the house. Sinister laughter, invisible footsteps, and icy breaths surrounded her every night. Yet, despite this, Martha did not stop. She believed that if she halted the construction, the spirits would flood in and take her life. The house was no longer just a place to hide, but the only weapon she had to protect herself from the afterlife. But deep down, Martha knew she was playing a dangerous game. And in this game, there were no winners. Blackwood Manor continued to grow each day, but just like its walls and corridors, Martha's fear and obsession only grew stronger. That morning, the sky over Vermont was shrouded in thick fog, signaling a gloomy day. Much like the fears spreading throughout Blackwood Manor, the workers continued their tasks, but the atmosphere had become heavy and tense. Stories of the curse and the angry spirits gradually spread among them, though no one dared to speak aloud, as Martha insisted that the work must never stop. Ethan, a young and energetic worker, continued painting the new doors on the third floor. He was one of the few workers seemingly unaffected by the ghostly rumors, and everyone saw him as a tough, fearless man, unbothered by the supernatural tales. But that afternoon, a horrific event occurred, leaving an indelible mark on Blackwood Manor. Ethan was standing on a temporary scaffold, painting the window of a room on the third floor. Everything seemed normal until a strong gust of wind suddenly swept through the hallway, causing the scaffold to sway. Ethan tried to keep his balance, but suddenly a sharp creaking sound came from the scaffold and it began to collapse. Before he could react, Ethan fell from a height of more than 3 meters, his head hitting the wooden floor with a heavy thud. The sound echoed throughout the house, startling the nearby workers. They rushed over, but when they arrived, they found Ethan lying motionless, blood pooling from his head onto the floor. A grim silence fell over the room. Everyone knew that Ethan was gone. The workers quietly exchanged glances, speechless. The scythe of death had visited Blackwood Manor, and this time it was no longer just baseless rumors. News of Ethan's death quickly spread throughout the house. The workers began whispering that the Blackwood family curse had officially begun. Some believed that it was the angry spirits in the house that caused Ethan's death. The wind that blew through the hallway wasn't a coincidence, and the collapse of the scaffold wasn't anyone's fault. It was the hands of the ghosts starting to claim lives. The workers near the scene began to recount that just before the accident, they had heard cold, eerie laughter echoing through the nearby hallways. Some even claimed to have seen the figure of a woman in a black dress pass by right before the scaffold collapsed. All these rumors only heightened the fear that had already gripped the remaining workers. When Martha heard the news of Ethan's death, she couldn't hide the panic gnawing at her mind. She knew this wasn't just an accidental mishap. To Martha, Ethan's death was proof that the spirits had drawn closer and they had begun to harm people. She believed that Ethan wasn't a victim of a scaffold accident. He had become the first victim of the angry ghosts seeking revenge. Martha told herself that the construction needed to be accelerated. If she stopped, the spirits would continue their attacks and the next victim would be her. She believed that only if the house became large and complex enough would the ghosts be trapped in the maze she was creating, unable to find her. With this thought in mind, Martha ordered the workers to continue their work despite the growing atmosphere of fear. However, some workers began to quit after Ethan's death. They believed that working in Blackwood Manor was akin to seeking death itself. Those who remained, though still working, feared that they would be next. The eerie whispers, invisible footsteps, and strange occurrences seemed to multiply after Ethan's death. Each day as night fell, no one dared to stay late. Every small noise in the house made the workers jump, glancing around, afraid that something was lurking, ready to strike. Even though they couldn't see it, they all felt that something invisible was present in the house. Martha, though she appeared strong on the outside, couldn't hide the fear inside. She knew that Ethan had now become a new spirit in the house, and she was certain he wouldn't be the last. Ethan's death had opened another door between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The spirits were no longer distant apparitions. They were becoming more dangerous and ruthless than ever. Each night, Martha could no longer sleep peacefully. The giggles of the spirits echoed in her dreams, accompanied by the cold footsteps and the whispers of souls demanding repayment. She dreamed of Ethan, his face covered in blood, standing in the shadows, staring at her without saying a word. She knew that if she stopped building, if the house didn't continue to expand, spirits like Ethan would return to claim her life. Haunted by her fears, Martha relentlessly ordered the workers to expand the house further, more hallways, more staircases, more empty rooms. She believed that this was the only way to keep the spirits at bay. But deep inside, she knew that the death sentence was drawing nearer. And the house she was desperately building to escape might be the very place that would bury her forever. Blackwood Manor was no longer just a house. It had become a haunted place where the spirits were slowly taking over, spreading terror into every corner. In the days following Ethan's death, Martha could clearly feel the spirits drawing closer. Blackwood Manor, now a haunted maze, was no longer the sanctuary she once believed it to be. The walls that Martha had built to keep the ghosts away now seemed alive, filled with invisible figures watching her every move. The supernatural occurrences were no longer limited to the workers. They began to target Martha directly. At first, she heard soft whispers at night, as if someone was standing right beside her bed, calling her name. The voice was no longer vague or distant like before. "Martha, Martha, you cannot escape," the whisper echoed in her head, creeping into every corner of the house. Each night, Martha lay awake, her ears straining to catch the smallest sound, fearing the spirits would appear at any moment. The spirits in the house didn't stop at vague sounds. They began appearing clearly before Martha's eyes. One evening, as she was walking down the long, dark hallway leading to the seance room, Martha suddenly stopped. In the mirror hanging on the wall, she saw a fleeting figure. It was a woman in a black dress, her hair hanging down, covering her face. Martha held her breath, staring at the figure in the mirror, and she realized that the figure wasn't her own reflection. As Martha tried to move, the figure didn't disappear. It stood still in the mirror, staring back at Martha, then slowly turned its head as if inviting her into another world, a world of darkness and despair. Martha stepped back in terror, but when she turned around, the figure vanished. Yet the cold feeling lingered, as if death itself was lurking, waiting to claim her life. Things became worse when the spirits no longer just appeared fleetingly, but started interfering with the real world. Mysterious bloodstains appeared on the walls. Doors would open and close on their own, as if someone invisible was coming and going. Martha even heard chilling laughter echoing from the dark corners of the house, the laughter of spirits toying with her. Once, while standing in the seance room, she clearly felt an invisible hand touch her shoulder, cold and heavy. She turned around, but no one was there. Martha became more panicked than ever. She knew the house she had spent her life building was now betraying her. The walls no longer protected her from the afterlife. Instead, they were opening eerie gateways, allowing spirits to pour in and torment her. One night, Martha decided to perform one last seance, hoping to contact Richard and her daughter. She believed that if she could reach them, they would help her understand what to do to escape this nightmare. She sat down, placed her hands on the Ouija board, and muttered the familiar incantations. The room was dark, lit only by flickering candlelight that illuminated her weary, tense face. "Richard, are you there? Please tell me. Please tell me what to do," Martha whispered, her voice trembling. The planchette began to move. Martha felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, and the candle flame flared up suddenly, making the darkness in the room even more distorted. The letters on the Ouija board moved, and gradually the words became clear. "Martha, you must leave." Martha froze, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe her eyes. It was Richard's voice, and he was warning her. "This house will not protect you forever. Their spirits have grown stronger, and they are coming for you." Martha felt overwhelming fear. Ethan's death, the supernatural occurrences, and now the warning from her own husband, all pointed to a truth she had been trying to avoid. The spirits could no longer be stopped. They had found a way in, and they were closer than ever. "No, that can't be true," Martha screamed, gripping the Ouija board tightly. "This house will keep them out. It has to. I can't stop. If I stop, they will harm me." The planchette moved again, and this time, another voice echoed in Martha's mind. It was the voice of her daughter. "Mother, they are coming. You must leave before it's too late. If you don't, they will take your soul. You cannot escape them." Martha began trembling, but deep down, she still couldn't accept this reality. "No, I can't leave. This house is all I have," she cried out, tears streaming down her face. Despite the warnings from the spirits of Richard and her daughter, Martha still refused to believe that she was out of hope. She couldn't accept that the house she had built with all her determination and fear couldn't protect her. Martha believed that if she kept expanding the house, if she didn't stop building, she would still be safe. The strange walls and winding hallways she had erected would continue to keep the spirits at bay. In her desperation and paranoia, Martha ordered the workers to continue their tasks. Despite the fear and panic that had gripped the house, she no longer cared about the warnings from the spirits of Richard and her daughter. In Martha's mind, there was only one truth. The house had to keep growing, because it was the only thread keeping her from the lurking darkness of death. But as night fell and the house returned to silence, Martha knew her time was running out. The spirits no longer appeared just in her dreams or as vague images in mirrors. They had begun to enter her world, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they came to claim her soul. Blackwood Manor, with all its strangeness and curses, continued to expand, but within its walls, death lurked in every step Martha took, waiting for the final moment to pull her into the darkness. Blackwood Manor, with each bizarre and illogical expansion, was increasingly turning into a true nightmare. The more it was built, the more it resembled a trap not just for Martha, but for anyone who dared to come near. Martha, who had tried to use the house to hide from the spirits, was now trapped in the very place she had created. The house was no longer just a tangled structure. It had become a living entity, consuming her bit by bit each day. The locals had long been wary of Blackwood Manor, but now fear spread throughout the entire town. People living nearby began hearing strange sounds at night, maniacal laughter coming from the house. The laughter had no clear source, but seemed to echo through the floors and winding hallways. The ghost of a woman in a black dress, much like the eerie stories passed around, began to appear more clearly. Some people claimed they saw her figure standing on the rooftop on moonless nights, her hollow eyes staring down at them. A nearby couple recounted seeing a candle moving through one of the windows, following the steps of an invisible figure. But when they got closer for a better look, the candle went out and the figure vanished. The strange phenomena were no longer confined to Blackwood Manor itself. They began to spread beyond, affecting those near the house. Some townspeople shared that they had started having strange dreams in which they were chased by invisible spirits, always waking up with a feeling of suffocation. A man living half a mile away even claimed he heard footsteps running across the field. But when he went to investigate, no one was there. While the house spread its haunting influence outward, inside, Martha was enduring her own collapse. She could no longer distinguish between reality and illusion. The ghosts of angry spirits seemed to be everywhere, in the mirrors, on the walls, in every breath of the house. Sleepless nights drove Martha's mind into paranoia and confusion. The ghosts no longer appeared only in her dreams. They were there even when she was awake. Martha couldn't sleep. Every time she tried to close her eyes, eerie whispers echoed, calling her name, threatening that her end was near. She heard invisible footsteps echoing through empty hallways, windows slamming shut with ominous force, and sometimes she even felt a cold hand rest on her shoulder. Panic consumed Martha, leaving her nearly incapable of rational thought. She could no longer find any place of safety within the house. Every corner of Blackwood Manor was now filled with invisible spirits, dark creatures waiting to take her life. Martha knew that no matter how much she expanded the house, death was drawing closer. Every step, every breath was being watched by unseen eyes. Martha's health deteriorated rapidly. She neither ate nor slept, and her body became increasingly thin and pale with each passing day. Fear had completely overtaken her mind. The dark circles under her eyes grew deeper, and her face bore the clear marks of anxiety and exhaustion. Sometimes she would sit quietly in her room, staring at the empty wall, as if some invisible ghost was speaking to her. One morning, when the last remaining workers arrived, they saw Martha standing by a second-floor window, her empty gaze fixed on the front yard. Though the sun had risen and the sky was bright with dawn, her expression remained cold, as if she no longer belonged to this world. The workers whispered among themselves that she had been possessed by the spirits. Some even quit immediately, unwilling to take part in the construction any longer. They believed the curse of the house had spiraled out of control, and anyone who stayed would meet the same fate as Martha. That night, Martha sat in the seance room where she had once prayed to contact the spirits of Richard and her daughter. But this time, the dark room seemed larger and emptier than ever. The candle before her flickered weakly, and the darkness swallowed everything around her. She could no longer see the objects in the room, but she could still feel the presence of the spirits. Martha began whispering her questions, but the Ouija board didn't move. Instead, she heard cold laughter coming from behind her. A chilling breeze swept through, and Martha distinctly felt an invisible hand touch her neck, icy as frost. She jumped up in terror, but when she turned around, the room was empty, with only the wind whistling through the door. The hauntings had become unbearable. The spirits had crossed the boundary between the afterlife and Blackwood Manor. Martha knew the house was no longer a refuge. The walls she had built could no longer keep the spirits out. They were here, in her world, and they were getting closer by the minute. Martha's collapse was near. She could no longer think logically, nor could she escape. Blackwood Manor, once the place she believed would protect her, had now become a prison. Martha was trapped by the very ghosts she had tried to avoid for so many years. No one dared approach the house anymore, and no one was willing to help her. On a stormy night, with thunder roaring across the sky, the townspeople once again heard mad laughter, echoing from Blackwood Manor. Some claimed to have seen the figure of a woman standing on the roof, her hair hanging down and her hollow eyes staring into the dark night. And then Martha disappeared. The house still stood empty and silent, but the locals knew that Blackwood Manor was never truly vacant. The angry spirits remained, and the shadow of Martha, the woman who mysteriously vanished, still lingered in the house she had built. She never escaped the curse. The message of this story goes beyond the fear of supernatural phenomena. It serves as a reminder that people cannot run from their past forever. Sins, mistakes, and pain must all be faced and resolved. Avoidance only makes fear grow larger, haunting us to the point where there is no escape. Martha tried to flee by building a maze of deceit and absurdity, but that very house, instead of protecting her, became her final trap. The story emphasizes that the more we try to escape, the deeper we become lost in the dead ends of our minds where fear has no way out. Moreover, the story reflects the connection between guilt and the natural punishment it brings. Richard Blackwood gained wealth from wars, from the deaths of many, and though he has passed away, the consequences of his actions continue to haunt his family. The curse of the Blackwoods is a reflection of the inability to escape responsibility for one's deeds. Although Martha wasn't directly responsible for her husband's actions, she was drawn into the spiral of guilt and fear, and she allowed it to haunt her to the point of destroying her life. The story advises us to learn how to face our mistakes, acknowledge the past, and seek redemption, rather than building layers of protection to hide. Running away is never the solution. It only allows fear and obsession to grow stronger, to the point where they can no longer be controlled. Like Blackwood Manor, the more layers of protection Martha built, the more isolated and imprisoned she became by her own fears. In the end, the story also raises questions about the balance between reality and the spiritual. The supernatural events in the story can be seen as symbols of the psychological fears people create for themselves. They don't necessarily have to be literal ghosts, but rather the ghosts of the mind fears, obsessions, and guilt that each person keeps hidden inside. When left unresolved, these ghosts can take over, causing people to lose their sanity and happiness. Like and comment number 1 if you find my story interesting. If the story is not good, please comment number 2 to let me know.